I was flying to Miami on what I thought was a family trip with my son and daughter-in-law, but the flight attendant suddenly whispered, "Pretend you're sick and get off the plane." I thought it was a joke, but she begged, "Please, I'm begging you." 20 minutes later, I understood why. My name is Harold Cooper. I'm 58 years old, and here's something you need to know about me right up front. I don't trust easily, and I sure don't scare easily either. Maybe that comes from my 4 years as an Air Force officer, or maybe it's from 32 years teaching high school history in Denver. Either way, those skills probably saved my life that day. But let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started, because looking back now, I should have seen it coming a mile away. The afternoon light was slanting through my study window, catching dust particles that danced in air that smelled like old books and the lemon oil I used on my handmade bookshelves. Yeah, I make furniture. Started as a hobby after my wife Sarah passed 3 years ago, but it keeps my hands busy and my mind off things I can't change. I was sitting at my desk, going through old lesson plans I'd saved from my teaching days. Call it nostalgia, call it stubborn hope that those years mattered. I don't know. The house was settling around me with those familiar creaks every old place makes, and honestly, I'd almost forgotten I wasn't living alone anymore. That's when I heard the front door slam downstairs. Not close. Slam. Like someone was either really excited or really pissed off about something. I looked up from a stack of essays about the Civil War that some kid had written back in 2018. Kenneth and Beverly had been living in my house for 8 months now, ever since Kenneth lost his job at the Toyota dealership downtown. Now, I love my son, always will, but these two had been moving through my house like a couple of ghosts for months. We'd nod at each other in the kitchen, maybe grunt mourning over coffee, but that was about it. Their footsteps on the stairs now had a different sound to them. Urgent, purposeful. Made my shoulders tense up like they used to before a difficult parent-teacher conference. Beverly appeared in my doorway first, which was unusual. Kenneth followed behind her with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking everywhere except at me. His eyes found my bookshelf, the window, the old military photos on the wall. Anywhere but his old man's face. "Harold," Beverly said, and right away I knew something was up. Her voice had that fake sweet tone that reminds me of politicians right before they raise your taxes. "We need to talk." I set down my reading glasses slow and deliberate. Old teacher habit when a student's about to try selling me a load of bull. About what? Kenneth shifted his weight from one foot to the other like a kid who needs to use the bathroom. "We've been thinking about family, Dad. About how we should spend more time together, you know?" "Quality time," Beverly jumped in, and without being invited, she walked right into my study and perched herself on the arm of my reading chair. Like she owned the place. Before life gets too busy. Here's the thing. When you've been teaching teenagers for 32 years, you develop a pretty good radar for when someone's trying to work an angle. My radar was going off like a smoke detector at a barbecue. Before what gets busy exactly? I kept my voice level, but my mind was already working, cataloging things that didn't add up. These two had been avoiding me for months like I had some contagious disease. Why the sudden interest in family bonding? "Just, you know how it is," Beverly said with this dismissive wave of her hand. "Kenneth, tell him about Miami." Now Kenneth finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my stomach drop a little. It was desperation trying real hard to look like enthusiasm. "Miami, Dad. Remember when we went when I was 12? That vacation after Mom's surgery? Let's recreate those memories. A whole week together, fully paid. Our treat." I set my pen down, careful-like. "You hated that trip, son. Complained the whole time, said it was boring, begged to come home early." Kenneth's smile flickered like a candle in the wind. "I was just a kid then. I see things differently now." The silence that followed felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I studied both of them, my son who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and tell me I was his hero, and this woman who'd somehow convinced him that his old man was nothing but an obstacle taking up space in a house that used to feel like home. Something had changed between us, and I couldn't put my finger on when exactly. Was it when Kenneth lost his job? When their bills started piling up? Or had it been gradual, like rust eating away at metal so slow you don't notice until the whole thing falls apart? "When exactly would this trip be?" I asked. "Next week," Beverly answered so fast it was like she'd been waiting for the question. "Everything's already arranged. We just need you to say yes." Now here's where things got really interesting. And by interesting, I mean my gut started telling me something was seriously wrong. That evening, Beverly announced she was cooking dinner. Let me tell you something. In the 8 months they'd been living in my house, Beverly had never, and I mean never, cooked so much as a bowl of cereal. She was more of a takeout and microwave kind of person. But there she was, moving around my kitchen like she owned the place, opening cabinets, using my dishes, acting like Martha Stewart all of a sudden. Kenneth was playing bartender, pouring wine with the kind of careful attention you'd expect from someone defusing a bomb. His hands had a slight tremor when I asked about the trip details, which struck me as odd. I mean, we're talking about a vacation here, not performing surgery. So this whole thing was planned without asking me first, I said, accepting the wine glass and watching him over the rim. Bold interrogation technique I learned in the Air Force. Sometimes the best questions aren't really questions at all. We wanted it to be a surprise, Dad, Kenneth said, still not quite meeting my eyes. A good surprise. Beverly set a plate in front of me, and her movements were precise, calculated. She'd worked in hospital administration for years at Presbyterian St. Joseph, and you could see that clinical efficiency in everything she did. Every gesture had a purpose. Then, she dropped the bomb. Harold, your life insurance policy is quite substantial. $750,000, right? Very responsible planning on your part. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Now, I've been around the block enough times to know when someone's fishing for information they shouldn't have. How exactly do you know that amount? Kenneth mentioned it once. She sat down across from me, cutting her chicken into these perfect little uniform pieces. Just conversation. I looked at my son. He was studying his plate like it contained the secrets of the universe, refusing to make eye contact. The mention of my insurance money felt wrong, timing wrong, context wrong, placed into casual dinner conversation where it had no business being. Here's something you learn in 32 years of teaching. Kids always tell on themselves eventually. You just have to know how to listen. So, I decided to do a little test. I haven't been sleeping well lately, I said, watching their faces carefully. My heart feels strange sometimes. Flutter-like, you know? Kenneth's eyes lit up for just a split second before he caught himself. You should see a doctor, Dad. Have you seen a doctor about that? But Beverly cut him off smooth as silk. Kenneth worries too much. You look fine, Harold. Probably just stress. Right there, that's when I knew for certain something was up. They looked at each other, just for a moment, but I caught it. Something passed between them, some kind of understanding that didn't include me. My chest did tighten then, but not from any heart condition. After dinner, while they disappeared into their bedroom downstairs, and yeah, it bothered me that my son was sleeping in my basement like some kind of teenager, I found something that made my blood run cold. Sitting right there on the dining room table were printed flight confirmations. Not just printed, already booked, my ticket already purchased for next Tuesday. They'd been so sure I'd say yes that they'd made irreversible plans. I sat alone in my study until well past midnight, holding an old photograph I keep on my desk. It's Kenneth at age 7, gap-toothed and grinning, hugging my neck like I was the safest place in the world. That little boy had somehow become this man downstairs, plotting something I couldn't name but could feel in my bones like bad weather coming. Now, 32 years of teaching American history teaches you a few things about human nature. People leave evidence. Always. They can't help themselves. Patterns emerge if you know how to look for them. You step back, observe the whole picture instead of getting caught up in individual incidents. The sudden generosity after months of cold shoulder treatment. The insurance comment dropped into casual conversation. Those looks between them. The pre-purchased tickets. See, when you've spent 3 decades teaching kids how to examine primary sources, you develop certain habits. You question everything. You look for bias. You check your sources. And right now, every source was telling me the same thing. Something was very, very wrong. Morning came with pale Denver sunlight streaming through my bedroom window, and the decision I'd made somewhere in the dark hours before dawn. I was going to Miami, all right, but not as the confused old man they thought I was. I was going as a former Air Force officer who'd learned a thing or two about reconnaissance, and a retired teacher who knew how to gather evidence and build a case. Kenneth knocked on my door at exactly 7 a.m., wearing a smile so bright it could have powered half of Colorado. "So, Dad, what do you say about Miami?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I'll go." The relief that flooded his face was immediately followed by something else, something that looked an awful lot like satisfaction. "Great, that's wonderful," Kenneth said, gripping my doorframe so tight I thought he might leave fingerprints in the wood. "You won't regret it, Dad." Beverly appeared behind him with this little nod that was barely perceptible, but I caught it. They'd won this round, or at least they thought they had. Now, here's the thing about being a former military officer. You learn to prepare for missions, even when you're not entirely sure what the mission is yet. I spent that morning packing my suitcase with the same methodical care I used to pack my gear before deployment. Underwear, shirts, toiletries, my prescription medications. That's where I paused. Something about Beverly's comment the night before, about my health, about how I looked fine, was nagging at me like a splinter you can't quite dig out. My hands moved almost on their own, placing my medications in my carry-on bag instead of the checked luggage. Call it paranoia, call it military training, but sometimes survival depends on small precautions that seem crazy until they save your life. The suitcase closed with a decisive click. Miami was waiting, and whatever they had planned, I'd be ready. Kenneth's car smelled like stale coffee and one of those pine tree air fresheners that had given up trying weeks ago. I sat in the passenger seat with my suitcase balanced on my lap because Kenneth claimed the trunk was too full of stuff. Funny thing was, when he'd popped it open to show me, I could see it was practically empty except for a couple of jumper cables and an old blanket. We merged onto I-25 heading toward Denver International Airport, and the silence in that car was thick enough to cut with a knife. Kenneth had a death grip on the steering wheel, knuckles white as fresh snow. Beverly sat in the back, typing on her phone like her life depended on it, then deleting whatever she'd written, then typing again. I watched her in the side mirror, and her face had that blank, calculating look I'd come to recognize, the same expression she wore when she was working through some problem at the hospital. "Excited about Miami, Dad?" Kenneth's voice cracked on the last word like he was 13 again. "Should I be?" He completely missed the point of my question. "Of course. Family time, beaches, relaxation. It'll be great. Relaxation. Right." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "When's the last time you relaxed, son?" No answer to that one. We drove past landmarks I'd known for decades. The King Soopers, where I used to take Kenneth grocery shopping when he was little. The library where we'd spend Saturday mornings when Sarah was working. The high school where I'd shaped young minds for over 3 decades. Where I'd taught kids how to think critically about evidence and not just accept what they were told. Each mile closer to the airport increased this pressure in my chest, this feeling that I was being carried towards something I might not be able to come back from. DIA appeared ahead of us, that weird tent-like structure that looks like something out of a science fiction movie. Kenneth parked in short-term parking, which struck me as odd. We were supposed to be gone for a week, but he chose the most expensive parking option. Another small detail that didn't add up, but I filed it away with all the others. The security checkpoint came too fast for my liking. Beverly insisted I go through first, her hand firm on my shoulder, guiding me forward like I was some kind of invalid who couldn't find his way. I placed my carry-on on the conveyor belt, watching her watch the screen as my belongings passed through the X-ray machine. She leaned forward, checking something, then visibly relaxed when my bag came out the other side clean. "See? Easy as pie," she said, but her relief seemed way out of proportion to the simple act of getting through airport security. At the gate, Kenneth and Beverly boarded immediately with Zone 1, while my ticket had me in Zone 3. They disappeared down that jetway without so much as a backward glance, leaving me standing there among strangers, my suitcase handle cutting into my palm. When they finally called Zone 3, I walked toward that plane like a man walking to his own execution. The jetway stretched ahead of me, that weird in-between space where you're not quite on solid ground anymore but not yet committed to the sky. The aircraft door was open, and that recycled air hit me like a wall, carrying the smell of cleaning chemicals and the lingering traces of thousands of previous passengers. I stepped inside, found my row number, and that's when she approached me. The flight attendant's name tag read Dorothy, and she had that professional airline smile until she leaned close, pretending to, "Check my boarding pass. Pretend you're feeling ill and leave this aircraft," she whispered. her breath warm against my ear. I froze. "Excuse me? I don't understand." But she was already moving away, tending to other passengers like nothing had happened. I stood there in the aisle, confused as hell, looking between Dorothy's retreating form and Kenneth and Beverly in their seats 3 rows ahead. They were both glued to their phones, hadn't even noticed the exchange. Was this some kind of joke? Some bizarre safety protocol I'd never heard of in all my years of flying? I took another step toward my row when Dorothy came back, and this time her professional mask had completely cracked. Her hands were actually trembling as she touched my elbow. "Sir, I'm begging you," she whispered, her voice urgent and low. "You need to get off this plane right now." I looked into her eyes then, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. This wasn't concern or confusion, this was pure, genuine terror, the kind that comes from knowing something specific and horrible. Now, when you've spent 32 years reading the faces of teenagers trying to lie their way out of trouble, you develop a pretty good sense for when someone's telling the truth. This woman was dead serious. "You're not kidding around," I said quietly. "I've never been more serious in my life." Her fingers dug into my sleeve like she was drowning and I was the life preserver. "Please, you have to trust me." That's when Kenneth's voice cut through the cabin noise. "Dad, everything okay back there?" There was something sharp in his tone, something that wasn't quite concern. Here's the moment where everything changed. I had maybe 3 seconds to make a decision that would either save my life or make me look like a crazy old man having some kind of breakdown. But you know what? Sometimes you have to trust your gut, especially when that gut has been honed by 4 years of military service and 3 decades of dealing with kids who thought they were smarter than they actually were. I made my choice. My hand went to my chest, fingers spreading over my shirt. My chest I managed to get out, and the words sounded strangled because the fear coursing through me was real, even if the symptoms weren't. I let myself stumble, dropping to one knee right there in the narrow aisle. The performance came naturally. Turns out genuine terror makes for pretty convincing acting. The reaction was immediate. Flight crew swarmed around me like bees, voices overlapping in professional crisis mode. "Sir, can you breathe? Sir, stay with us." Hands under my arms, lifting, supporting. Someone called for a wheelchair. I let them help me, but I kept my eyes sharp, my mind clear. The sick old man act was just that, an act. Through all the commotion, I managed to catch Kenneth and Beverly's faces, and that's what I'll remember until the day I die. Not concern, not worry, but disappointment. Raw, undisguised disappointment that lasted maybe half a second, before their masks slammed back into place and they started performing concern for everyone watching. Kenneth stood up from his seat and his first movement was aggressive, almost angry, before he caught himself and softened it, made himself look like the worried son. "Dad, what's wrong? Should we come with you?" No, everyone stay seated," one of the crew members said, blocking the aisle. "We'll take care of him. Medical personnel are standing by." As they wheeled me backward down that jetway, back toward the terminal, back toward solid ground, I heard Beverly's voice. She thought she was speaking low enough that only Kenneth could hear, but sound carries funny ways in the quiet after a crisis. "This ruins everything," and Kenneth's hissed response. "Not here. Not now." The wheelchair carried me back through the jetway, back into the terminal, back to safety. My phone buzzed in my pocket as they settled me in the medical area. A text from Kenneth. "Dad, hope you feel better. We'll call when we land." I watched through the window as that aircraft pushed back from the gate as it began its slow taxi toward the runway. Kenneth and Beverly were aboard that plane, getting smaller and more distant with each passing second. The physical separation felt absolute, like I'd crossed some kind of invisible line and could never go back to not knowing what I now knew. The plane disappeared from view, just another metal speck against the blue Colorado sky. "Mr. Cooper?" I turned around. Dorothy was standing there, still in her uniform, but clearly off duty now. Her face was pale, drawn, like she'd aged 5 years in the last 20 minutes. She glanced around the medical area, checking for anyone who might be listening. "We need to talk," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "Right now, somewhere private." I nodded. Whatever she had to tell me, I had a feeling it was going to change everything I thought I knew about my own family. And I was right. The medical room was small and windowless, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. A paramedic had just finished checking me over. "Vitals fine, probably anxiety," he said, and left me alone on the examination table. Every time I shifted, the paper underneath me crinkled like leaves in October. Through the narrow window in the door, I could see the tail end of my flight disappearing into the clouds, carrying my son and daughter-in-law toward Miami while I sat in this sterile little room with my heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with any medical condition. My phone buzzed. Kenneth's third text. "Dad, please respond. We're worried sick." I turned it off. The door opened and Dorothy walked in. She was still in her uniform, but that professional airline composure had completely shattered. She closed the door firmly, checked the hallway through the window once, then turned to face me. Her hands were shaking. "I need to show you something," she said, her voice trembling like a leaf in a windstorm. "What I'm about to do could cost me my job, but I can't let this happen." I straightened up on that examination table, paper crinkling beneath me. "Show me what?" She pulled out her phone with fingers that couldn't quite stay steady, unlocked it, navigated to her video library with the careful movements of someone defusing a bomb. I recorded part of her phone call in the restroom before boarding. She paused, met my eyes directly. "Your daughter-in-law's call." The phone screen showed a bathroom stall, mostly ceiling tiles and harsh fluorescent lighting. The audio was muffled, but voices carried clear enough through the echo of tile and porcelain. Then I heard Beverly's voice, unmistakable in its cold, clinical precision. "The pills will dissolve quickly in his drink. He won't taste anything." A pause that felt like forever. "Altitude makes heart attacks more plausible. Emergency at 30,000 feet. Medical response limited. Investigation much harder." Another pause. Then 750,000. "Kenneth's nervous, but he's committed." Then she laughed. Actually laughed, like she was discussing weekend dinner plans instead of my murder. I watched that video once, twice, 3 times. Each viewing peeled back another layer of horror. My daughter-in-law was discussing my death like it was a business transaction, weighing logistics and timing, calculating profit margins on my life like I was some kind of commodity instead of a human being. Who was she talking to? My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I don't know." Dorothy lowered the phone, but she kept it gripped tight like she was afraid it might disappear. But she mentioned the plan being in motion and Kenneth being fully on board. Those were her exact words. I looked at her directly. "Why did you do this? Risk your career for a complete stranger?" Something flickered across her face, old pain that hadn't quite healed over. "My father. 3 years ago. His nephew convinced him to change his will, said it was just temporary for tax purposes. Then Dad fell down the stairs at his house. Her jaw tightened like a vice. They ruled it an accident. I couldn't prove anything different. That regret has been eating at me ever since." She met my eyes. "When I heard that conversation, heard her plotting your murder like she was planning a grocery list." I couldn't stay silent again. "I'm sorry about your father." "Don't be sorry." Her voice hardened like steel. "Stop them." I took out my small notebook, the one I'd carried for 32 years of teaching, habit dies hard, and wrote down her contact information in my careful teacher's handwriting. Even in crisis, documentation instinct kicks in. We exchanged phone numbers. She promised to preserve that recording, understood it might become legal evidence. When we shook hands, her grip was firm despite the trembling. After she left to catch her next flight rotation, I sat there in that little medical room trying to process what I'd just learned. My son and daughter-in-law hadn't just been planning to steal from me. They'd been planning to murder me. Not in some fit of rage or moment of desperation, but coldly, methodically, with the kind of careful planning you'd use for a business merger. The taxi ride home took 40 minutes through Denver suburbs, past strip malls and chain restaurants and housing developments that all looked the same. The driver tried to make small talk. "Missed your flight?" "No," I said, staring out the window at a city that suddenly felt different, more dangerous. "I caught something much more important." He fell silent after that, probably figured I was some crazy old man talking nonsense. When my house came into view, that 2-story colonial with the garden I'd been maintaining for 30 years, Kenneth's car wasn't in the driveway. They were in Miami right now, probably wondering why their plan had failed, scrambling to figure out what went wrong. I paid the driver and walked up the path to my own front door. The house felt different now, violated, knowing what had been plotted within these walls, discussed at my own dining table, planned in the bedroom where I'd welcomed them when they needed help. Time to find out just how deep this conspiracy went. I set my carry-on by the stairs and went straight to my study. You know how some people have a home office? Well, mine's more like mission control. Filing cabinets full of 32 years worth of lesson plans, student records, and personal documents. Insurance policies, bank statements, legal papers, property deeds, everything a responsible adult accumulates over nearly 6 decades of living. I spread it all across my dining room table like I was preparing for the world's most important final exam. Created a systematic layout, chronological order, categorized by type. Old habits from the Air Force and the classroom. When you're dealing with a potential enemy, you gather intelligence methodically. Hours passed. The light outside my windows faded from afternoon gold to dusk purple to full dark. I put on my reading glasses and examined each document under the good lamp I use for grading papers, looking for inconsistencies, signs of tampering, evidence of the conspiracy Dorothy had exposed. And I found it. The life insurance beneficiary form dated 6 months ago, changing the primary beneficiary from my niece in Atlanta to Kenneth Cooper. Now, I remembered my niece Lisa clearly. Put herself through nursing school working double shifts at a diner. Never asked me for a dime. That policy was meant for her, had always been meant for her. But there at the bottom was my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. See, when you've been grading papers for 3 decades, you get real familiar with handwriting analysis. Kids try to forge parent signatures on report cards all the time. This attempt to mimic my writing had failed the same way. The capital H in Harold was wrong, too elaborate. With this fancy flourish I'd never made in my life, I photographed that document with my phone. Evidence. Preservation. Just like I'd teach my students when we studied primary sources. More digging revealed additional horrors that made my stomach turn. Bank statements showing transfers I'd never authorized. $45,000 over 6 months, siphoned away in amounts small enough to escape casual notice. A power of attorney document granting Kenneth financial authority, signed with my forged name. Medical records I'd never seen, documenting cognitive decline I'd never experienced. Here's what really got to me. They'd been building a paper trail of my incompetence while I was living my normal life. Teaching night classes at the community center twice a week, grading papers, working in my wood shop, maintaining my garden. Creating this fiction of a failing mind to justify their control, to explain away my death as the natural consequence of deteriorating health. Evidence. Timeline. Motive. Method. I spoke out loud to my empty house, old teaching habit kicking in when I was working through a complex problem. They planned this for months. Living in my house, eating my food, plotting my murder. I held up that forged power of attorney, staring at the signature that wasn't mine. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment desperation. This was systematic, planned, sophisticated. They'd researched, prepared, established legal groundwork for both theft and murder. The documents stayed spread across my dining room table. I couldn't bring myself to clean them up. They represented physical proof of betrayal, tangible evidence of how thoroughly I'd been deceived by the 2 people I'd trusted most in this world. I sat in my reading chair as midnight approached, the house silent around me except for the familiar creaking of old wood settling. My son was in Miami right now, probably reassuring Beverly that they'd find another opportunity, another method. They didn't know I had Dorothy's recording. They didn't know I'd discovered their forged documents. They didn't know the prey had become aware of the hunters. My hands rested on the chair arms, steady now. The shock had burned away, replaced by something colder, more focused. They hadn't just tried to kill me. They'd been stealing my life piece by piece for months, erasing my autonomy, building toward my complete erasure. But here's what they didn't count on. You don't survive 4 years in the military and 32 years dealing with teenagers without developing certain skills. Patience, observation, the ability to gather evidence and build an airtight case. They thought they were dealing with some confused old man who'd be easy to manipulate and eliminate. They were about to learn they'd badly miscalculated. I picked up my phone and started making calls. First, I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who specialized in elder fraud and family exploitation. Someone who'd seen this pattern before and knew how to fight it. Second, I needed to document everything properly. Photos weren't enough. I needed professional forensic analysis of those forged signatures, expert testimony about the fraudulent medical records, a paper trail that would stand up in court. Third, I needed to be smart about this. Kenneth and Beverly thought they had all the advantages: youth, health, numbers, the element of surprise. But they'd forgotten something important about old soldiers and retired teachers. We know how to plan campaigns, we know how to gather allies, and we definitely know how to win wars. Time to show them what a real strategy looked like. 3 days had passed since I discovered those forged documents. 3 days of avoiding Kenneth and Beverly's increasingly frantic phone calls from Miami, deflecting their concern with vague mentions of stomach trouble from the airport incident. 3 days of research, reading attorney reviews online, making discreet calls, organizing evidence into color-coded folders that now sat on my desk like ammunition waiting for battle. Gerald Parker arrived at exactly 2 p.m., just like we'd scheduled. Mid-50s, with gray threading through dark hair and an expensive briefcase that spoke of a successful practice. A state law specialist with 20 years of experience fighting exactly this kind of family exploitation. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and assessing. The kind of man you'd want on your side when the shooting started. "Mr. Cooper, thank you for trusting me with this situation." He settled into the chair across from my desk, opened that briefcase and pulled out a laptop and legal pad. "Walk me through what you've found." I slid the first folder across the desk. Blue tab, financial documents. Gerald's professional composure held steady through the first few pages, then started cracking as the scope of their conspiracy revealed itself. Forged signatures, altered beneficiaries, fraudulent power of attorney documents. His fingers moved faster, flipping pages, cross-referencing dates, building a timeline in his head. "When did you last personally review these documents?" His pen hovered over that legal pad. "The insurance policy, about 5 years ago, when I retired from teaching. Haven't touched it since." "And you never authorized any beneficiary changes?" "Never." My voice was steady, certain. "That policy was meant for my niece in Atlanta. Lisa put herself through nursing school working double shifts. I wanted her to have something when I'm gone." Gerald made notes, his writing quick and precise. "Your daughter-in-law, Beverly Cooper. What's her professional background?" "Hospital administrator at Presbyterian St. Joseph Medical Center. She's got administrative access to patient records, document templates, physician signature stamps, the whole works." Understanding dawned in his eyes like sunrise over the Rockies. "She created your medical history, made you incompetent on paper while you were still living your normal life, while I was teaching night classes at the community center twice a week." I almost smiled at the irony. Lecturing on American military history while being declared cognitively declined in fraudulent medical reports. Gerald opened his laptop, began running forensic accounting software on my bank records. I'd provided account access authorization that morning. Red flags appeared immediately on his screen, highlighted in crimson like warning flares. 45,000 over 6 months, he said quietly, scrolling through the data. Systematic theft. Small amounts initially, then growing bolder as they gained confidence. Classic embezzlement pattern. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out Kenneth's laptop. He left this in his room. I know his passwords. Set up the computer for him years ago when he was struggling with technology. He never changed them. Gerald glanced up and something flickered in his expression. Understanding maybe of the ethical line I'd crossed. But he took that laptop without hesitation, connected an external drive, began data recovery procedures that would make the FBI proud. Within minutes, deleted emails resurrected themselves on the screen like ghosts returning to haunt the living. The conspiracy unfolded in digital form, black text on white background, email chains between Kenneth and someone calling himself a medical consultant. Discussion of substances that could cause heart failure, untraceable and standard autopsy procedures, particularly effective at high altitude where medical response would be limited. Prices had been negotiated, $10,000 for consultation and supply. A meeting arranged at a parking garage in downtown Denver. Gerald's jaw tightened as he read. "This is a murder contract, Harold. Your son negotiated your death like he was buying a used car." The words should have hurt more than they did, but I'd burned through the pain during those 3 days of documentation, reached a colder place beyond conventional grief, where facts mattered more than feelings. "Keep reading," I said. "There's more." He found the draft will on Kenneth's desktop. Everything left to Kenneth and Beverly Cooper, down to the last paperclip. My signature forged at the bottom, dated just 2 weeks ago. They'd planned to discover it after my death, present it to probate court, claim I'd changed my mind about Lisa in my final days. Gerald leaned back in his chair, removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. When he looked at me again, his professional mask had dropped entirely. "Harold, may I call you Harold?" I nodded. "This goes way beyond estate fraud. This is conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, elder abuse, financial exploitation. We're talking serious criminal charges here, not just civil recovery." My phone buzzed on the desk between us. Kenneth's text lit up the screen. "Dad, where are you? We need to talk about your health when we get back." Gerald glanced at the phone, then at me. Understanding passed between us without words. The manipulation was continuing even now, pressure being applied to keep me confused and compliant. "Build the case first," I said. "Make it absolutely undeniable. Then we strike hard." Gerald nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression. "You've really thought this through. I taught military strategy through American history for 32 years. Sun Tzu, Napoleon, Patton, I learned from the best." I met his eyes. "Know your enemy. Choose your battlefield. Control the timing." "They're going to realize something's wrong," Gerald warned. "When I file protective orders, block accounts, revoke fraudulent documents, they'll know someone's onto them." "Good." My hands rested flat on the desk, steady and calm. "Let them panic. Panicked people make mistakes, and mistakes create more evidence." A slight smile crossed his face. "All right then. Here's what we do." He spent the next hour outlining our strategy. Calls to his contacts, document examiners for signature analysis, forensic accountants for detailed audit trails, a private investigator to track down this mysterious medical consultant from Kenneth's emails. He photographed evidence with a high-resolution camera, created digital backups, uploaded everything to encrypted cloud storage that would survive any attempt to destroy physical documents. 3 evidence packets, he explained, printing documents and organizing them into separate folders. 1 for eventual police involvement, 1 for civil proceedings, 1 for you to keep secure off-site, safe deposit box, not your house. I nodded, absorbing every detail. Student mode engaged, learning the machinery of legal warfare. As afternoon faded toward evening, Gerald gathered his materials, packed that briefcase with methodical care. At my study door, he paused and turned back. "Harold, one question. When this is over, what do you want? Justice or revenge?" I didn't hesitate. "I want them to understand what they've done. I want consequences that last long enough to matter." He considered this, then nodded approvingly. "Don't change anything yet. Act normal if they call. I'll handle protective orders and account freezes through legal channels. Give me 1 week." After he left, I sat in my darkening study, listening to the house settle around me. My phone buzzed again. "Kenneth. Dad, dinner tomorrow night when we get back. We need to talk about your future." I stared at that text, then typed my response. Yes, we definitely need to talk about the future. The double meaning was crystal clear to me, completely opaque to him. The hunter had become the hunted, though he didn't know it yet. 1 week later, I was sitting at my breakfast table with coffee growing cold in the mug, pretending to read the Denver Post while listening to the sounds upstairs. Kenneth and Beverly had returned from Miami the night before, and I'd played the confused old man perfectly, asking which pills to take, wondering where I'd left my reading glasses, shuffling around like someone whose mind was starting to slip. What they didn't know was that while I'd been performing helplessness, Gerald had been systematically destroying the foundation of their conspiracy. Account freezes, power of attorney revocations, beneficiary changes reversed, all timed to activate this morning when they tried to access my money. The sound I was waiting for came at exactly 9:15 a.m. Kenneth's computer chiming upstairs, incoming email from the bank. Footsteps, rapid and urgent. Kenneth's voice, sharp with alarm. "Beverly, get up here right now." I sipped my coffee slowly, counting to 60 in my head. Old teacher habit, wait before reacting. Let the situation develop fully before you make your move. Upstairs, urgent voices overlapped. Words indistinct, but the tone unmistakable. Pure panic. At 60, I called up the stairs in my best confused old man voice. "Everything all right up there?" Silence. Then Kenneth's forced calm. "Fine, Dad. Just some work stuff." The lie was obvious to everyone, including him. I returned to my newspaper, not actually reading, just waiting and listening. Throughout the morning, Kenneth attempted to access accounts from his computer. I could hear him typing, then stopping, then typing again. Phone calls followed, increasingly desperate conversations with bank representatives. His side of those conversations told me everything I needed to know. What do you mean the account is frozen? I have power of attorney, legal authorization. This is a mistake. The bank's responses must have been crystal clear because Kenneth's voice grew more strained with each call. Around noon, Beverly tried calling the hospital where she worked. I heard her through the thin walls. What do you mean my access has been suspended? Administrative review? What investigation? See, Gerald had been thorough. While they were sipping drinks on Miami Beach, he'd been contacting Beverly's employers, providing evidence of her fraudulent use of medical systems to create fake patient records. Her access to hospital computers had been terminated, pending a full investigation. For lunch, I made sandwiches. Unusual behavior that neither of them commented on, too absorbed in their crisis to notice their supposedly failing father was suddenly taking care of himself just fine. They ate mechanically, phones out, texting frantically, probably reaching out to lawyers, or maybe that medical consultant who'd been so willing to help them kill me for the right price. When they got home that evening, I heard them whispering urgently in the hallway before entering the kitchen. Time for the next phase of my little educational program. I called them to the dinner table and served pot roast, the same recipe I'd been making for 30 years, the one Sarah used to love. The domesticity of it made what was about to happen feel surreal, like we were just a normal family having a normal meal instead of what we really were, predator and prey sitting down together, except they didn't know who was which anymore. Strange thing happened today, I said conversationally, cutting my meat into precise pieces. Got a call from the bank about some unusual activity on my accounts. Apparently, someone's been making unauthorized transfers. I looked up, met their eyes directly. I asked them to investigate thoroughly. Kenneth choked slightly on his water. Beverly's fork paused halfway to her mouth, trembling almost imperceptibly before she forced herself to continue eating. Dad, Kenneth began, but I wasn't finished. About that, I interrupted gently like I was discussing the weather. If you were just helping me manage my money like you said you were. I paused, let that hang in the air for a moment. Well, the bank will sort it out, unless... I let the pause extend even longer. There's something you need to tell me. Beverly's professional mask started slipping, her voice sharpening as that clinical control cracked around the edges. Harold, you're clearly confused about your finances. This is exactly why you need our help, why you need oversight. Oversight. I repeated the word slowly, like I was tasting it. Interesting choice of words. Legal oversight? She pushed harder, probably figuring attack was better than defense. Medical oversight. For your own protection. Protection from what? I asked mildly. Protection from whom? The silence that followed was its own answer. Kenneth stared at his plate like it contained the meaning of life. Beverly's knuckles had gone white around her fork. Right on cue, my phone rang. Gerald, exactly as we'd planned. I answered it, keeping my expression neutral, playing the part perfectly. Oh, hello, the bank, yes. I'll definitely come by tomorrow morning. I watched their faces drain of color as I spoke. Investigation? Of course, whatever's needed to protect my accounts. I paused for effect. Unauthorized access is a serious matter. I really appreciate them taking it so seriously. After I hung up, Kenneth approached me at the kitchen sink where I was washing dishes. Dad, about tomorrow. Maybe I should go with you to the bank. Help explain the account management we've been doing for you. I smiled gently, drying a plate with methodical care. That's thoughtful of you, son, but I think I should handle my own finances. I'm not incompetent yet. That word, incompetent, hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Kenneth froze, searching my face with desperate eyes. Had I emphasized it deliberately? Did I know about their plans? How much did I understand? I turned back to the dishes, leaving him suspended in uncertainty. Late that night, I lay awake in my bedroom with my phone on the nightstand. I'd installed a small security camera in the living room the week before, told them it was for protection after some break-ins in the neighborhood. They'd approved enthusiastically, never thinking it might be used to protect me from them. Now I watched through the camera app as Kenneth and Beverly sat on my couch having the kind of argument that tears families apart. "This is your fault," Beverly's voice cut through the audio feed like a surgical scalpel. "Your sloppy forgeries, your weak stomach for the original plan." "The power of attorney was perfect," Kenneth protested weakly. "Obviously not, since we're locked out of everything." She stood up, started pacing. The camera followed her movement as she gestured angrily. "We have to move to Plan B immediately, the incompetency evaluation route. I know people at Presbyterian St. Joseph who owe me favors. What doctor would go along with that?" "Not go along? Just interpret findings in our favor. There's a difference." Her voice dropped, became calculating and cold. "I'll arrange it first thing tomorrow. Get him declared mentally unfit, become his legal guardians, control everything, including whether this bank investigation continues. I recorded everything. Timestamps preserved automatically. Evidence accumulating like interest in a savings account. Slow at first, then growing exponentially." The next morning brought the phone call I'd been expecting. Dr. Howard Mitchell, claiming to be my family physician, which was interesting since I didn't have a family physician. I used the walk-in clinic near the library for my occasional medical needs. "Routine cognitive assessment," the pleasant voice explained. "Just a standard evaluation this afternoon at 2 p.m. "Of course," I agreed warmly. "I appreciate such thorough medical care." After hanging up, I immediately called Gerald. "They're moving fast. Medical evaluation to declare me incompetent. Dr. Mitchell, supposedly my physician." A pause while Gerald checked his database. "No medical license in Colorado under that name. It's completely fake. So they're using a fake doctor to declare me incompetent. Attempted fraud on top of everything else." Gerald's voice held grim satisfaction. "Harold, keep that appointment. Record everything. I've already arranged an independent psychiatric evaluation for you tomorrow morning with Dr. Ruth Anderson. 30 years experience, impeccable credentials. Their fake diagnosis versus a real professional assessment will destroy them in court." That afternoon, I drove to the address they'd provided for this so-called medical evaluation. Time to see exactly how far down this rabbit hole went. The address led to a shabby office building downtown with temporary signage you could print and tape up overnight. I sat in my car for a moment, recording device active in my shirt pocket. Gerald had provided professional equipment that would hold up in court. Then I walked toward what would be the final act of Kenneth and Beverly's little drama. The fake Dr. Mitchell was exactly what you'd expect. Someone with no credentials trying to look official, asking questions designed to make me appear incompetent regardless of my answers. I played along, recorded everything, and left with documentation that would later prove attempted fraud. The next morning, I drove to Dr. Ruth Anderson's office for the real evaluation. 30 years of forensic psychiatry, impeccable reputation, the kind of professional who'd testify before Congress if needed. Her assessment was thorough, comprehensive, and absolutely devastating to Kenneth and Beverly's narrative. "Fully competent," she concluded, setting down her pen after 2 hours of cognitive testing. "No evidence of dementia or any decline. Your analytical skills are actually above average for your age group. Frankly, Mr. Cooper, your mental acuity could put people half your age to shame." 2 weeks later, the court papers arrived. Kenneth and Beverly had filed a petition for guardianship, claiming I was mentally incompetent and dangerous to myself. The supporting documentation was impressive. Witness statements, medical reports, incident logs painting me as a confused old man wandering around in pajamas, unable to manage basic finances. But Gerald had been busy too. Our counterfiling was 47 pages detailing 18 separate criminal acts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, multiple counts of forgery, elder financial abuse, witness tampering, obstruction of justice. The evidence exhibits filled 3 bankers' boxes. The preliminary hearing was a masterpiece of legal theater. I sat beside Gerald, taking organized notes, every movement demonstrating competency. Kenneth and Beverly sat across the aisle with their expensive attorney, money they'd somehow found despite all their supposed financial troubles. Judge Kenneth Sullivan reviewed both filings with evident skepticism. The court-appointed psychiatric evaluation he ordered was Dr. Anderson's assessment, the one that had already declared me fully competent. Within hours, the prosecution offered a settlement. Kenneth and Beverly would return the $45,000, vacate my property immediately, relinquish all inheritance claims, accept permanent restraining orders. In exchange, I'd drop all criminal charges. I tore that settlement offer into pieces and let them fall like snow onto Gerald's conference table. They tried to murder me, I said calmly. Not steal from me, murder me. Beverly researched untraceable poisons. Kenneth negotiated the price of my death. They planned it for months while living in my house. They don't get to walk away from attempted murder by writing a check. The trial took 3 days. Dorothy flew in from wherever her flight rotation had taken her, and her testimony was devastating. The recording played in open court, Beverly's voice filling the room as she discussed dissolving pills in my drink and making my death look like a heart attack at altitude. The digital evidence told the complete story: email chains about obtaining lethal substances, forged documents, systematic theft, fake medical records. Kenneth's own computer had preserved everything, including browser searches for untraceable heart attack drugs and high-altitude medical emergencies. When I took the witness stand, I spoke directly to the jury like I was teaching a particularly important lesson about American justice. "When did you first suspect something was wrong?" the prosecutor asked. "When my son and daughter-in-law suddenly wanted to spend time with me after months of treating me like I was invisible in my own home," I replied. "When casual dinner conversation included detailed knowledge of my life insurance policy. When supposedly loving family members seemed disappointed that I'd survived a medical emergency instead of relieved." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Sullivan's sentencing was thorough. Kenneth received 4 years probation with strict conditions, plus $60,000 in restitution. Beverly got 6 years, longer due to her professional credential abuse, and lost her medical administration license permanently. Both received lifetime restraining orders and complete revocation of any inheritance rights. "This case," Judge Sullivan stated, "represents the systematic betrayal of familial trust for financial gain. The defendant's victims' mercy in requesting probation rather than imprisonment is more than they deserve." 6 months later, I was back in a classroom, not teaching high school history this time, but volunteering at the community center, helping veterans navigate college applications and financial aid. The Honor and Integrity Foundation I'd established with my estate was funding scholarships for military families who understood the value of education and service. I kept one thing from the whole ordeal: that old photograph of 7-year-old Kenneth, gap-toothed and grinning, not out of sentiment but as a reminder. Sometimes the people we love most are capable of the greatest betrayals. Sometimes trust, once broken, can never be repaired. But justice? Justice served properly has a way of healing wounds that seemed unhealable. The last I heard, Kenneth was working at a used car lot in Pueblo. Beverly was filing insurance claims in Nebraska. Different states, different lives, far away from the home they'd tried to steal through murder. Dorothy and I exchange Christmas cards now. She sent me a photo last year of her father's grave where she'd placed flowers and a note that said simply, "Justice served. Rest easy, Dad." Sometimes the best revenge is just making sure the truth gets told in a courtroom by people who understand the difference between right and wrong. And sometimes that's enough.